Okay, I think we will get started. This meeting has been noticed as a special meeting and public workshop. We do not have a quorum, so today's meeting will proceed as a public workshop, as noted on the agenda. Any members of the MCE Board of Directors will participate in the discussion in the same fashion as a public, and such board members may not discuss among themselves, other than as part of the scheduled agenda, any other specific business of MCE. Thank you.
Okay, sorry for the minute. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today, both in person and online. My name is Viken Kasarjan, and I'm the acting CEO and COO of MCE. I'd like to welcome our board members, staff, and members of the public to our second workshop to discuss key power supply topics. Today's session is about resource adequacy. Resource adequacy is the framework that helps a California independent system operator ensure enough electricity resources are available to meet customer demand when and where they are needed, particularly during periods of system stress. It is a critical reliability requirement for all load-serving entities in California and represents a significant component of power supply costs. Understanding how resource adequacy works, its benefits, and its limitations provide important context for future policy and procurement discussions. Our goal, once again, is to create space for informed, thoughtful discussions so that when the board is considering decisions down the road, we're all starting from a common foundation. The goal of these workshops is to support open, honest, and fact-based discussions, build mutual trust, and explore how we can advance MCE's mission and vision while maintaining a strong focus on affordability and rate stability for our customers. As we do this, it's also important to understand the operational and marketing boundaries we're working within, given the ever-changing compliance requirements, availability of resources, market conditions, pricing, and climate change. I also want to emphasize that we welcome all professional and public input throughout this process. We're not seeking a predetermined perspective or outcome. What matters is that contributions are grounded in facts and help us better understand the trade-offs in front of us. Strong, durable policy decisions are built through open dialogue and consideration of a range of viewpoints. Please let us know if there are any specific experts or perspectives you'd like us to consider. We want to make sure we're hearing from people that will help us inform the board's thinking as comprehensively as possible. And I just want to take a minute and sincerely thank all the staff that, in addition to their normal work, have been working on these workshops and presentations. We are in the middle of a compliance period in IRP and things like that, so it's coming to the board pretty soon, but I just want to take a minute to recognize all of staff's work. With that, thank you again for being here and for your engagement. I'll turn it over to CB Hall, our Director of Power Resources, to get started. Go ahead, CB. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Viken. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, great. Yeah, again, my name is CB Hall. I'm the acting head of MCE's Power Resources team. Vidhi Chavla is out on leave. And I just want to echo what Viken said. Thank you very much for taking time out of your personal lives to be here and to thank you for caring about these topics is what I want to say. Okay, so yeah, as Viken mentioned, we are talking about RA today, resource adequacy. So with that, if we can go to the next slide, please. For those of you who listened to the workshop a couple weeks ago, this slide will be very familiar. And so it's a little bit repetitive. but I want to go through it if that's okay, just briefly recap. These are the existing building blocks that make up Power Resources, the 5 building blocks. And as we mentioned last time, each of these 5 blocks represents a key expenditure type for MCE, and in aggregate, they're about 90% of our budget. And so just briefly, I'll go through them. First, we have our CAISO load payments. These are the payments we make to the CAISO for all the energy that our customers consume, scaled up to account for power line losses. And you may remember that these payments are based on CAISO day-ahead and real-time market clearing prices at the load hub. And so they are inherently volatile payments that we need to hedge. Next, we have our long-term power purchase agreements and energy storage service agreements. These are the foundation of our portfolio, as you all know. And we get clean energy, mostly renewable energy from these. We get the rights to the CAISO revenue that hedges our CAISO load. And we get 2 types of capacity products from these agreements. The first is midterm reliability capacity. That is new steel in the ground, clean capacity that is required to be online by certain dates in the future. And so to the extent that we are entering into a contract for new steel in the ground, we will get midterm reliability capacity. And then the second type of capacity product is resource adequacy, and that we will be talking about today. But as Vicken explained, that is critical for ensuring ultimately that the CAISO has enough supply offered into its markets to meet demand and reserve requirements. And then, as we mentioned a couple weeks ago, we have these 3 additional contract types that we use to supplement the long-term agreements. We use Index Plus contracts to give us additional clean energy. We use pure hedge agreements to give us additional CAISO load hedging. And then we use the RA-only contracts for additional RA. Okay, so we are going to talk about RA today. Last time we talked about Index Plus and pure hedge agreements. But before we actually go into the key elements of resource adequacy, I actually have a couple slides that I was debating whether to put at the front or the end. So they might be slightly out of context, but there was a request that we cover an important terminology distinction. And so that is what I'd like to cover for the next 2 slides. And then we will go back to the beginning and go through the resource adequacy discussion. So Mike, if we can go to the next slide, please. Oh. Sure. On the previous slide, actually, Mike, if we can go back to the previous slide for 1 sec, sorry. Dan Segedin was mentioning the Super 6, which I think he's breaking number 3 Index Plus contracts out between large hydro and renewables. So if you split 3 into 2 parts, you end up with 6. So that's the Super 6. Okay. Okay, cool. Mike, if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. And I apologize. It looks like this font is kind of small. And I know that because I can't really read it. But I do have a copy, but that's okay. So what we've got is an important terminology distinction that I want to cover here. So, and again, I apologize if this is a little bit basic, but I think it is important. Power versus energy. On the left, we have power. And power is the rate at which work is done. It is calculated as energy per time, or joules per second, and the standard unit for power is watts. On the other hand, we have energy on the right-hand side. Energy is the work that is done over time. And so it is calculated as power multiplied by time. And the standard unit of energy is 1 joule, which is 1 watt of power multiplied by 1 second. In the electricity industry, we more commonly use watt hours. So that's 1 watt of power multiplied by 3,600 seconds. So it's 1 watt hour is 3,600 joules. Okay, let's just go through a couple examples. Example 1, a 10 watt light bulb requires 10 watts of power. That means at any instant that that light bulb is turned on, it needs 10 watts of power. If you look at the right, you will see that if you turn that light bulb on and run it for 4 hours, you are using 40 watt-hours of energy. Okay, I got a nod from Bruce, so I think I'm okay. Example 2, a 100 megawatt wind farm has the same power capacity as a 100 megawatt geothermal plant, right? Meaning that at any given instant, both of these facilities have the capability to generate at 100 megawatts of power. If you look at the right, you will see, though, that over the course of a calendar year, they produce very different volumes of energy. So the wind facility, the wind farm, again, while it has 100 megawatts of power, on average, over the course of the calendar year, it generates at 32 megawatts in this example. We call that a 32% capacity factor, and that yields 280,000 megawatt hours of energy. The geothermal plant, meanwhile, produces close to its full capability, or at a power that is close to its full capability for much of the year. And so in this example, on average, it is producing at 90 megawatts, which again means a 90% capacity factor. And so it is producing, over the course of the year, 788,000 megawatt hours. So almost 3 times as much energy as the wind farm. Okay. Okay. Actually, one more note on this slide before we go to the next slide on terminology. You will hear some of us use, or many of us use the term capacity instead of power. But I just want to note that while that is almost always the case when we say capacity, we mean power. It is worth probably double checking with whoever you're talking to that that is indeed what they mean when they say capacity, because there's also a concept of energy capacity. Batteries have both. They have power capacity and energy capacity, which is why I think it's important to make sure you're on the same page with whoever you're talking to. A 100 megawatt 4-hour battery has 100 megawatts of power capacity, meaning it can charge or discharge at any given instant up to 100 megawatts. That battery also has the capability to store 400 megawatt hours of energy capacity. Okay, so that's terminology. What we're going to do now is, on the next slide, apply these concepts to resource adequacy. And I realize that I'm getting ahead of myself again because we haven't gone through the fundamentals of resource adequacy, but that's okay. The main point I think that we want to make on this slide is that contracts for resource adequacy are contracts for power capacity. That's the main point. When an LSE buys 10 megawatts of RA for 1 month, it is buying 10 megawatts of power capacity. It's important to note, though, that that capacity must be available throughout the month. But the LSE is not buying energy. However, that RA capacity that is shown to the authorities must be offered into the CAISO markets, where it can indeed be awarded and dispatched to provide energy. And so then there's a natural question then that comes up, which is, well, okay, so then who is taking responsibility for this energy? Who is accounting for it? And so to answer that question, let's look at these last 2 bullets on the slide here. If the energy and corresponding environmental attributes are also under contract to an LSE, then the LSE can claim this energy on its power content label. But I will also note that the off-taker for the RA does not have to be the same entity as the off-taker for the energy. So for example, MCE could buy the RA, another load-serving entity could buy the energy from the same resource. If the energy and corresponding environmental attributes are not under contract, then this energy is accounted for as system power, grid power on the power content label, which is something we talked a bit about a couple weeks ago, and how how that can show up as a portion of a load serving entity's energy mix, depending on what they have under contract versus their retail sales. Any questions on power versus energy and/or how it's applied to RA? And by the way, we can always circle back to this topic later, so no problem there too. Oh yeah, we will start in San Rafael first, and then I'll try to keep in mind that there's Concord as well. Sorry, Concord. Director Andre.
Thank you, CB, for the tutorial and the differences in the vocabulary. So the fact that our RA, if it's gas and it doesn't show up on our power content label, is simply because we haven't contracted for the energy part of it. It has nothing to do with how the power content, I mean, so that's the reason why it's not on our power content label, is because we've contracted for the capacity, but we have not contracted for the energy.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Director Wilkinson.
I'm going to ask a really dumb question, I'm afraid, because I don't quite understand. How can anything be under contract for both just regular supply of energy and also RA?
I know it is interesting, right? Because it's the same resource. I think but this is where we distinguish between these concepts of power capacity, which is the capability to produce energy, and energy, which is actually is power produced over time. It's actually it has come to fruition, if you will. Yeah, does that make sense?
No. But if the power is being supplied to the grid as part of the regular contract, and then for whatever reason extra supply is needed, how does that happen?
If supply beyond what is, sorry, maybe you can repeat your question. I just want to make sure I'm following.
So if this supply resource is being used to full capacity to supply to the grid on a regular basis,
Yeah.
but then there's a call for RA because whatever reason the grid needs more, there's a heat wave, whatever it is, how can there be an extra slice that is for RA?
Okay. Maybe if you don't mind, maybe I'll just I'm going to try to help here, because if you think of 100 megawatt resource, let's say it's a gas fired, or let's do 100 megawatts of geothermal, and it counts for a certain megawatt capacity of resource adequacy, which we call net qualifying capacity. MCE could be the off-taker, for example, for that RA, right? Which means we have the rights to tell the authorities that we have this capacity, power capacity under contract, that then ultimately has to be available throughout the month. And it therefore has to, the seller, the resource scheduling coordinator on the seller side, has to offer it into the CAISO markets. And if the market optimization engine clears those awards and dispatches it for energy, then energy will be produced. And so when that energy is produced, that energy can be under contract to someone else. It doesn't have to be under contract to MCE as the off-taker of the RA only. Andy would like to also help. Thank you, for
Yeah.
Power Resources.
Maybe this will help a little bit too. Resource adequacy, it's a market design that CAISO California has decided is valuable. And it's like in Texas, for example, they don't really have resource adequacy. So the energy costs can be really, really high. They can go up to thousands of dollars per megawatt hour. And in that market design, they've said, that's fine. That's how we're going to value things in this market. So the resource adequacy, it's just that. It's to make sure that we have the resources that are on standby, not necessarily producing power, but in case there is a heat wave or in case there is more load than we expected, they're there to, like, we've valued that in how we've set up the market. CB, does that?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great, and it depends, it really depends on the marginal cost of the resource when they're submitting their offers into CAISO, whether they're going to be dispatched ultimately. I mean, that's part of, so you can have a solar resource that 100 megawatts of solar, maybe it qualifies for a much smaller portion on the resource adequacy side. It then offers into the CAISO markets, and it's extremely likely that it will be dispatched because it's probably bidding in at 0 or less than 0. And so it will be dispatched. Whereas you might have a super expensive peaker plant that is contracted for RA and doesn't get dispatched as often because its marginal cost is much higher. It doesn't clear as frequently. I don't know if that helps, but
CB?
yes, Vicken.
Just Vicken. Well, actually, I want to thank Director Wilkinson for her question because it's really important to cross these pages, these first 2 pages, before we continue with the presentation. And so the question is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Director Wilkinson, we have a 50 megawatt plant, capacity 50 megawatts, that has 50 megawatts of RA. The question is, if that RA resource is generating without a call from the CAISO, how can it get a call from the ISO to respond for an RA condition? So I think you answered that question, CB, by saying the RA resource, the 50 megawatt or whatever capacity, has a must offer obligation to generate to the CAISO when it's called upon. And when it's called upon and it generates, and that energy has a specific contract relationship with a third party, that energy will count for that third party. And if it is not, it will generate the called upon energy to provide system power. So I'm just trying to dissect your question. An RA resource cannot be just generating willy-nilly when there's no call on it and be considered as an RA. It must be a must offer obligation to the CAISO that it can produce on that capacity. When it's called upon and clears the market, it will generate. I hope that was helpful.
And Vicken, if I may add on one thing, because the people are using the term called upon as maybe this additional action that the CAISO takes, and that is not true. There is no additional calling on. It is simply awarded through the CAISO's market optimization engine. That is one and the same thing as what we mean by called on. So if you think there's some additional action that the CAISO is taking to call upon an RA resource, no, that's not happening. An RA resource has an obligation to submit a supply offer into the market. The market optimization engine looks at all the offers, demand, requirements, constraints. It optimizes and it spits out awards, and that's it. So there is no additional action beyond that. You've met your RA obligation by simply submitting the supply offer. Yes, Stephen.
So just to use some simple words, when the energy is used by somebody who needs it, or it's yielded or provided by some generating source, is that then the trigger for it getting reported on the power content label, as opposed to just having it be as capacity where it's available? Correct. Or it's allocated, or it's budgeted? It's almost like budgeted doesn't get to the power content label, actuals does. I just want to close the circle because you brought that up, what some is and some isn't reported on it.
Yes, that is correct. It is when the energy is actually produced that then it will then feed the power content label.
Okay,
exactly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dan.
CP, this is
Oh.
Director Darling. Sorry.
Sorry, Director Darling.
Let me try, because my head has been hurting about RAs ever since I've been on this board. And I finally kind of captured it with why do we have RA? And it's because CAISO needs a certain amount of engine, no matter what, because if they don't have the RA, if they don't have that capacity and the demand goes up, we have brownouts and blackouts. And so the RA is there so that no matter what happens, they have enough, they if they need to push on that accelerator, there's enough engine there to get the car onto the freeway. Is that making sense?
Yes, exactly. But it's through their market optimization engine that's happening. That's the only tweak I would make to that. But yes, I totally agree. Thank you. And by the way, when we go through the fundamentals, maybe some of this will become a little more clear. This is why I was debating about whether I should put these slides at the end. But let's keep going with questions, though.
This is Director McCormick in Concord. Just to follow up. So if something is you've got, I understand, makes sense. You have RA, they need a certain amount of capacity or available capacity they're going to use. But does that mean it's basically sitting? I guess I get a little confused. Basically, if you've got 10 megawatt, whatever the right amount is, RA that isn't called on, is just not being generated at all, or is there a different thing being generated when it's called upon by CAISO and being generated and not counting toward CAISO?
The RA capacity that is procured ahead of time and then shown to the regulators also ahead of time, no later than 45 days in advance of when the month actually begins. And then when the month begins, that power plant that has been shown for RA now has an obligation every hour to offer itself essentially the capacity into those CAISO markets. And if it clears, in the case of a gas plant, it will then start burning gas. If it doesn't clear, there will be no gas burned, to try to use a gas example, if that helps.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Sabrina, did you have a comment?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to quickly circle back on the PCL and maybe put a finer point on, I think, Andy's comment, if helpful. So I think the question kind of that Director Wilkinson raised is, how are we essentially doing two transactions on the same resource? Which is a really good question. And I think it's worth pointing out that really California really intentionally separates reliability procurement from energy accounting. So RA is essentially an insurance product. And energy accounting is separate. So the policy objective is to ensure LSEs, load serving entities, procure sufficient dependable capacity while separately tracking energy sources attributed to retail portfolios. And the energy sources are what shows up on the PCL. But for our RA only contracts with natural gas, we don't have the legal title to that energy, so it doesn't show up on the PCL because it intentionally only accounts for energy, not capacity, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Sabrina. Are there more in Concord before we circle back just to any other questions in Concord? And then we'll.
I see no additional hands, CB.
Okay, sweet. And then we'll go back to Dan in San Rafael.
Thanks, CB. I just want to clarify that so that people know, based on prior conversations with you and with others, this is not firing. These are firing kind of all the time, every day, these RA resources. These gas plants are there. Yes, they're under this RA contract, but in practice, the way the calculation works, since it's the difference between your load and the resources available, by definition, in certain hours, when they go into that bid stack, they're going to get dispatched. And so they will provide energy every day they're firing. Is that a fair characterization?
By and large, if you look at the whole RA fleet, that's mostly true. Yes, absolutely. But as you know, Dan, it definitely depends on the resource type and the marginal cost. So Diablo Canyon, for example, it's self-scheduled. I don't even want to get into that, but it is producing, period. It's shown for RA, it's producing, period. There's no slowing down there unless it's taking a fuel outage or whatever. But with an expensive peaker plant, again, that has like a really high heat rate, that will not be generating all the time. No, it may take very high LMPs for that locational marginal prices, CAISO prices for that plant to clear the market. So it really does depend on the technology and the plant.
Sure, but the lower heat rate gas plants are going to be firing every day, especially in the shoulder hours and over.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's generally true. Exactly. Okay.
We have member of the public online, Mary Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. I would like to know for unused RA, which has been paid for, what happens to the funds that have been generated?
You're talking, so you're saying, as an example, MCE buys 1 month of RA from a peaker plant. I'm just trying to give an example. And it has the must offer obligation. It bids into the CAISO and never gets awarded over the
Correct.
course of the entire month. Is that the setup? Okay, cool. Yeah, well, the seller keeps the money and that's it. And by the way, the reason that's a good thing is because that revenue that the seller collects there from the RA payment is an important revenue stream for that plant to cover its going forward fixed costs, which CAISO prices themselves are probably not enough to cover, because in general they're more covering marginal costs, not fixed costs. So anyway, does that answer the question, hopefully?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, Director Wilkinson.
I'm sorry, one additional question. So, we're MCE's criticized for having dirty RA compared with some of the other CCAs. But hypothetically, and I actually don't know the composition, but if a lot of our RA is actually peaker plants and they're not dispatched often, their actual carbon impacts are pretty low, correct?
Yes, that would be absolutely correct. If our RA were mostly peaker plants, you're absolutely right.
But it's not.
You'll see in this presentation, we have a lot of gas-fired RA, but I think a lot of it is probably combined cycle, if I had to guess. I don't actually know the breakdown within the gas mix, like single cycle, combined cycle, cogen. I don't know what that breakdown is, but I could find out. Okay.
There's member of the public, Vicki Johnson, online that has her hand raised. Go ahead, Vicki. You have to unmute yourself.
All right, I should be online. Thank you. For say 2025, what percentage of the RA costs were under contract versus not under contract? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Do you mind repeating it once more?
Yes, we have here your 2 bullet items. If the energy is under contract or if the energy is not under contract.
I see.
So I'm just trying to get a feeling for the RA expenses, approximately how much, say for 2025, were under contract versus not under contract.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. That is a great question. And I'll rephrase it for MCE. We get our RA from 3 types of contracts. 1, PPAs, long-term power purchase agreements. 2, standalone energy storage agreements. And then 3, RA-only contracts. It is just the PPAs where we also get the energy. The storage agreements, we also get the CAISO revenue, but there's no renewable energy to go around there. But so I think maybe a way to answer your question would be to break it down where we get our RA from by contract. I think that might be a helpful response to your question. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer. Because again, I mostly came here to discuss concepts, which I'm sorry, I just haven't had the time to prepare all the data. But we could follow up for sure.
Johnny has his hand raised. He might have. Go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, based on the budget that we just passed for the 26, 27, if you're talking about just RA only contracts, that would be about 105 million for the year, where the cost of energy total is about 630. So that's about a sixth thereabout. That's on just RA only contracts.
Thank you so much, Johnny. So a sixth of our spend was on RA only, where we get no energy from it. Okay. Okay, great. Great. Well, I mean, actually, it's probably good that we covered this at the beginning because there's a lot of questions and we probably wouldn't have been able to get to them. So actually, that was good. Okay, now we're going to go step back and go through fundamentals. So if we can go to the next slide, please. And thank you to both Andy and Sabrina who helped tee this slide up. But I will, I'll repeat a little bit. What is the objective of resource adequacy? To me, I think there's a primary objective and maybe a secondary objective. The first objective to me is to ensure ultimately that in each particular month, the CAISO will ultimately have enough supply being offered into its markets to clear demand and reserve requirements each month. And they want to know that in advance to ensure that when they arrive at that month, it's not too late. The secondary objective, I would say, is to provide a revenue stream for some of the plant owners to ensure that they can cover their going forward fixed costs and that they don't then have to retire, which would therefore, we would lose that valuable power capacity and might lead to issues. So that's a secondary objective. It's kind of a compensation objective. But you might question these objectives and you might ask, why do we need a resource adequacy program? And as Andy mentioned earlier, you don't have to have one necessarily. You could say, why can't CAISO market prices provide enough of an incentive for generators to offer their supply into the market? And that is one way you could approach it. And that is what Texas has done. But in California, we have some history. We went through a major crisis in 2000, 2001, and we had those rolling blackouts and severely high wholesale prices and bankruptcies. And coming out of all of that, the state decided we want a resource adequacy program. We want to go that path. And so it was established and implemented in 2006. So that's what we have. Okay, so the key elements of resource adequacy as it applies to the CAISO grid are listed here, A through F. And again, this is kind of just the way I think about it. It's not, there's a lot of great literature out there on RA. This is just the way I kind of break it down in my own mind. But to me, it starts with reliability expectations, which we will talk about. And it is those expectations that drive the actual requirements for load serving entities. These are monthly requirements, and the supply counting rules. And once you have those requirements and counting rules established, load serving entities can now go out and contract for RA supply. And again, these contracts are executed in advance of when the month begins. They can be executed months in advance, years in advance. They have to be executed at least 45 days in advance because the month ahead showing is 45 days before the month starts. And that brings me to letter E, which are the compliance showings. These are the year ahead and month ahead showings that load serving entities have to make to the authorities to prove to them that they have enough power capacity, known as RA, under contract and that they've met their obligations. And by the way, for MCE, that means we have to tell the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, and the CAISO. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Once those showings are completed, then the month ultimately arrives, and now the seller is the one on the hook. The seller is the one who has the obligation to offer that RA capacity into the CAISO's markets. Okay, so that's kind of the overview. We're now going to zoom in on each of these. So Mike, if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so it starts with reliability expectations that drive RA across the CAISO grid. But now you might ask, wait a second, who manages the RA program? And the answer is it is jointly managed by the CAISO, by the California Energy Commission, and by a whole host of what are called local regulatory authorities. And the CPUC is the largest of those local regulatory authorities and definitely the most important because they're the big gorilla. And we are an LSC within the CPUC jurisdiction. So the CPUC is the local regulatory authority that matters for us. And so it is the CPUC that sets our requirements, which we refer to as slice of day requirements. And we'll get into that, but there are 24 requirements that we have every month. And that's why they're called slice of day, because of this month-hour slices. And they also set the supply accounting rules. And again, we will get into those. Let's take a look at this third bullet. The CPUC sets requirements and counting rules to achieve a specific reliability expectation. One CAISO grid load loss event every 10 years. What does that mean? It means that the CPUC is doing modeling, and it is setting the requirements and counting rules in a way to achieve in their modeling only one load loss event every 10 years. And you might ask, why one load loss event every 10 years? Why not one every 100 years or one every year? Where did that come from? It is, the short answer is, it is a standard that is common across North America. And that is what utilities, so that is what utilities across the continent use. But in all honesty, my own opinion is that it could probably be re-examined. There are some shortcomings to this metric. I'll just highlight a couple. This metric is only looking at whether there is a load loss event, like if there is an outage in the modeling. It doesn't look at the duration of that outage. It doesn't look at the severity of that outage. It only looks at the frequency. Anyway, it is a reasonable metric. It's used across the continent, and that is what the CPUC uses in its modeling. So if we can go, actually, let's see if there are questions on this. I'll pause for 1 sec. Okay, great. Then let's go to requirements. Thank you, Mike. Okay, so these are the requirements for load serving entities that the CPUC sets. These are called slice of day requirements. What we've got here are our system capacity requirements, okay? System capacity is capacity that is required to meet CAISO-wide demand. And this is the main requirement, I will say, that we have. So we have to secure enough system capacity to meet our hourly load forecast on the worst day of the month, plus a planning reserve margin of 18% for 2026 and 2027. So let's unpack that a little bit. What is the worst day of the month? That is the day with the highest forecasted peak load, the highest forecasted peak load across CAISO. And so it's all part of the forecasting, but on that forecasted, on that day when there's the highest forecasted peak load, we have to meet our load forecast, hourly load forecast, plus a planning reserve margin. What is a planning reserve margin? That is additional capacity above and beyond our load forecast that is required in order for the PUC to meet those reliability expectation results that we just discussed. So in their modeling, they have to add additional requirement in order to achieve that modeling outcome. And so for 2026 and 2027, that outcome happens to be 18% above the load forecast. And so you can look here at the graph at the bottom, this is actually our August 2026 system RA requirement. And you can see that the total height of each bar represents our slice of day requirement. And you can see that it's the load forecast plus in gray plus the planning reserve margin in blue. Okay, so that's our system requirement in a nutshell. Just to make things more complicated, we also have to meet flexible capacity requirements. What is flexible capacity? That is capacity that has the ability to ramp. And I'm going to leave it at that because it's not a hugely important issue for our procurement, is what I'll say. It could become in the future, but not right now. And I will say that we are able to use a subset of the supply that we use to meet our system RA requirement. A subset of it has to be flexible to check the flex capacity requirement box, if you will. So it's not like we're out there buying additional flex capacity. No, we just have to make sure that a subset of our capacity that we're using for system requirement is also flexible. Okay, and then finally, there are local capacity requirements. What is local capacity? That is capacity that is located in transmission-constrained pockets within the CAISO grid. There are certain geographical areas that essentially have transmission bottlenecks, if you want to think about it that way, and the state needs to ensure that there is enough capacity, power capacity located within those constrained areas to ensure reliability within those areas. Otherwise, they could be stranded and not have enough supply to meet demand. We used to have to buy local. We don't anymore. There is a central procurement entity today that is responsible for procuring local capacity. Who is that entity? It happens to be, for us, a firewall division of PG&E, or Department of PG&E. Within Edison's territory, it is a firewall division of Edison's territory. So you will see in a subsequent slide, we will make reference to this local capacity. So I wanted to bring it up now. Any questions on slice of day requirements? Bruce.
Yeah, thank you. This is getting deeper than I've ever gotten into anyway. So the 18% planning reserve margin, I'm just guessing, maybe you can just confirm that this is where it comes from, that CAISO models out in their model. First of all, they try to figure out what's going to be the worst day in August. So they're looking probably at a weekday because there's more economic activity on a weekday. And they're looking at weather forecasts and holidays and all kinds of things. And they decide what's the worst day in August. And they're looking at all the 24 hours of the day. That's, you can see the 4 to 9 period is high there. That's pretty typical. So then that 18% planning reserve margin, I'm guessing that goes back to that in their model, they're looking to statistically have approximately what is it? You said one in every
10 years. One
failure in every 10 years.
Exactly.
And so that's a statistical determination that in their model.
Exactly.
And that planning reserve margin would come out of more statistical calculations that that would lead to that. And so that over time, over the years, that 18% planning reserve margin would probably adjust as the statistical model settles out with respect to reality as it occurs.
And exactly. Thank you so much, Bruce. And just a couple clarifications. It's the PUC that does the modeling. But yes, they have to keep update. They have to keep this. They're actually doing it right now for the 2028 planning reserve margin. So in a few weeks, I think we're going to find out what the planning reserve margin is for 2028. That's why we don't have it up there on the slide yet, because we don't know yet. But yes, and by the way, the other clarification I'll say is that it's really the California Energy Commission who kind of takes ownership for the load forecasting side of it. But that's why they all work together, CAISO, CEC, and CPUC.
CB, we have a member of the public, Giant, online.
Yeah, thank you, CB. A question is, what type of resources do qualify for flexible capacity?
A lot of them do, actually.
No, so I understand
we
a lot.
joke about that. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. I understand a lot, but my question is, if a lot qualify for that, it'd be helpful if you could tell me what type of capacity does MCE procure for flexible qualification, and is that a premium to buying regular system array? Thank you, sir.
Yes, and I'm sorry. I should have given you a proper answer. Absolutely, there is a premium, but it's not much because of the fact that so much supply today qualifies for flex. Batteries qualify for quite a lot of flex, actually. Hydro and a lot of the hydro with significant amounts of upstream storage, reservoir capacity. A lot of the gas plants qualify. Anything that can be ramped within, I'm actually forgetting the exact ramping requirement, but it's a 3-hour ramping requirement. What am I missing here? Solar and wind are not flexible capacity. They're intermittent. But a lot of, and Diablo Canyon is also not flexible. So maybe that helps.
Yes, it does. And
Okay.
How much does MC procure? How much of your load needs to carry flexible capacity?
I forget. I'm sorry. Yeah, Johnny, or can someone save me on that one? I can't remember what the flex requirements are. And partly the reason I don't know that off the top of my head is because it is not much of a premium to meet, so it's not front of mind for me. But it's a good question. Okay. And we can follow up. Yeah, thank you. Director Andre.
So is there much of a price premium between the gas RA versus some of the flex capacity RA?
A lot of the gas RA is flex. Like
Okay.
it comes with the flex capacity, the flex characteristic.
Uh-huh.
So when you're buying like gas-fired RA, you're getting gas-fired RA, and it comes with the flex.
I see.
Yeah.
And so there's not much price difference then between buying, say, battery RA versus gas-fired.
There is a difference.
Uh-huh.
There is a difference, but it's not because of the flex. It's because it's really more has to do with actually the slide we're about to get to.
Okay.
Which is
Uh-huh.
if you look at these slice of day requirements, we have 24 obligations. And so we've got to meet these 24 obligations. And what you'll see on the next slide or very shortly is that the gas-fired capacity, a lot of it, you get a high net qualifying capacity across all 24 slices. Whereas with storage, you only get to show it, for example, a 4-hour storage resource, you only get to show for 4 slices out of the 24. So that's inherently not as valuable. You also have to bring charging energy as well for the storage, which we will talk about. So there is a price difference between a gas-fired resource and storage. Yeah.
CB, we have Vicki Johnson that would like to speak.
Hello, this might not be quite the right time, but I understand the CPUC has penalized a lot of the CCAs, maybe even IOUs, for not complying with the RA requirements. The Orange County Power Authority, for example, paid a $2 million fine for not supplying the RA energy when some people said the fine was much cheaper than the cost of the actual energy might have been, which was tens of millions. Can you just comment on, is the fine mechanism, does it really help comply, or are the fines so small that it's okay for a CCA to not pay for RA? Thank you.
Thank you. I missed a little bit of the end of your question, but I will just say that we take the MCE takes the RA obligation very seriously, and if I'm correct, Nathaniel, we have never missed, right?
That's correct. We've met all of our RA obligations to date.
Yeah.
And for the reason that you state, MCE sort of doesn't play the economics game with reliability. We think meeting reliability requirements is key to what we're here to do. So we haven't leveraged the lower price of the penalty against the price of RA.
Yes, exactly. And I want to give credit where credit is due. That is our consultant PEA that does that RA procurement on our behalf, and they've never missed a compliance. Okay.
CB, I just wanted to do a time check. It's almost 5:30 now, and we have 6 slides left. So just wanted to give you.
Yes. Yes, because I do want to make sure we get to I think the MCE chart for August will be really helpful for people. So we're not too far away from that, but if we can at least get to that one, it's the last slide of section C. So yeah, we're almost there. But okay, so any other questions, or should we keep? Okay, great. So let's now talk about how we meet these requirements with supply. Now, unfortunately, this slide is difficult to walk through. So I'm sorry, but we will just do our best here. There's a lot on it. It is the CPUC, though, that sets supply counting rules, again, for MCE. And what they do is they calculate qualifying capacities. And these qualifying capacities are by technology type, by region, and then they give the qualifying capacities to the CAISO. And the CAISO takes them and they calculate net qualifying capacities, which account for whether the modeled output of each resource can serve system load under stressed conditions. That is known as deliverability. That second bullet there, we're talking about deliverability. So each resource, the ability to serve the bulk grid, if you will, under stressed conditions. And deliverability is mandatory for resource adequacy. And so it is the net qualifying capacity that matters for each resource. To the extent that your resource is fully deliverable, your net qualifying capacity will be equal to your qualifying capacity. To the extent that you are partially deliverable, your NQC will be lower. And to the extent that you have no deliverability, your NQC will be 0. Okay, so as I said, NQCs are what matter, and they are used for both the showings that we make to the CPUC and the showings we make to the CAISO. And I know that sounds confusing, but if you remember what I was talking about before, where we have these compliance showings in the year ahead and the month ahead time frame, with those showings, we are making those filings to 2 different entities, essentially, to both the PUC and the CAISO. And if that's not confusing enough for you, with the PUC, the showings that we make can have up to 24 NQCs per resource, right? To account for the slice of day slices, the 24 slices. The CAISO only looks at one resource, one value. per month. So the PUC and CAISO, their methodologies, they are dovetailed, but they are different. That's a little bit of a footnote. I think what's more important for this conversation is that the PUC requirements are really driving our procurement, the slice of day requirements, so we can just stay focused on that for this conversation and not worry too much about this nuance of how we show things to the PUC versus the CAISO. I think that's just a detail for now. Okay, so let's get to the table. These are examples of MCE supply that we use for RA and the counting rules. So the first category, thermal resources, such as geothermal, landfill gas, natural gas, right? Peakers, cogen, et cetera, combined cycles. These get one value per month. In other words, there's a flat profile across the 24 slices. And in general, they get high values. They are counted either at their Pmax or something fairly close to their Pmax. The Pmax is the maximum operating capability of a resource. So to the extent that you can get a net qualifying capacity at your Pmax, that is that is the highest value essentially that you can get. And so in general, the takeaway here is that thermal resources get flat profiles that are quite high. Then we go to the solar and wind resources. These are the resources that get a curve. They get 24 values per month, and it differs by technology and region, and it's based on historical production. And then finally, we have the energy storage resources, and as we kind of just discussed maybe a few minutes ago, storage resources are counted at their Pmax, so that's great, but they're limited to the number of hours at which the resource can discharge, right, at full throttle. So a 4-hour battery you can only show for 4 slices. A small caveat there, if you're a 100 megawatt, 4-hour resource, you can count it. Instead of counting at 100 megawatts for 4 slices, you can, if you want, count it for 80 megawatts times 5 slices, right? So the point being, energy storage is flexible. You can show it where you need it. And that is consistent with the way it's actually dispatched in the market. It's a very flexible resource. Okay, if that table confused you and you don't like it, we're gonna do it again. But this time we're gonna do it visually with a graph. So if we can go to the next slide, please. This graph basically, hopefully brings to life a little bit more the table we just discussed. It is showing examples of the slice of day qualifying capacities that we were just talking about. And what you see on this graph are 5 resource types. And what you're looking at on the x-axis is 288 values. You're looking at all 12 months times 24 slices per month. And I stupidly didn't label the x-axis with the months. So I could have put January, February, all the way through December, and that would have made it easier for you. But if you look at the solar curves, you will see that there are 12 of them. And that is corresponding to each month. So the first curve and the last curve, that's January and December, and you can see those 2 curves for the solar in yellow have qualifying capacities that are peaking in the middle of the day slices at roughly 50 to 60% of Pmax. In the summer months, in the middle of the chart, you can see the solar qualifying capacities as a percent of Pmax are peaking at about 80 to 85%. And then, of course, in the nighttime slices, you get 0, right? That's why there are gaps between each of those curves. The wind in green, I'll just say briefly here, you can see that it is, in each month, the qualifying capacities are peaking during the nighttime hours, right? Which is a nice complement to the solar. And then let's go up to the top of the chart. I don't know how well you all can see those colors. Probably not well at all, but there are two solid lines at the top. One is for a combined cycle gas turbine. The other is for geothermal. As you can see, they are flat profiles for each month. And actually, in this case, they're flat across the entire year. And they are very close to Pmax. So they're getting a very high RA net qualifying capacity for these resources. And then finally, if you look closely, you'll see those little dashes. Those are represented in pink. Those are representing the 4-hour storage. So it's shown at its full Pmax, 100%, but only for 4 slices out of the 24 slices each month. And so that's the illustration on the storage. And importantly, again, the storage requires additional charging capacity that we will get to on the next slide. I'll show you how that works. I think I will go then now to that next slide, and then we will break for questions. I just need some water. Okay. Hopefully you'll enjoy this chart because it does bring together a lot of the concepts we've already discussed into one place. So what you're looking at here is actually our August 2026 RA filing. This is our portfolio. And again, this is for August 2026. So we submitted this in mid-June, right? 45 days in advance of the month. This is what we submitted to the PUC and the CAISO. And what you can see, again, on the x-axis are the 24 slices that represent the slice of day. You see with the black curve there, that is our RA obligation. You have already seen these values in a previous slide, but now they're represented as a curve. And then on the y-axis, you see the net qualifying capacity measured in megawatts. And again, if you look at the black curve, you see that our obligation peaks at about 1,400 megawatts in the evening. And now the question is, how did we meet all these obligations, these 24 obligations? And we will now go through them, starting from the bottom. In gray, you will see 400 megawatts with a flat profile, all the way, same value, all the way across the 24 slices of capacity that came from PG&E. And that really should say PG&E and central procurement entity allocations. So it's both PG&E allocations and the central procurement entity, which is a firewall division of PG&E allocations. These are allocations, they are mostly natural gas. They also include a chunk of Diablo Canyon nuclear and then a small amount of storage. Why are we getting these allocations? That's a much longer discussion, but I want to just highlight a couple. One of the big reasons, one of the biggest reason we're getting this big chunk of capacity, 400 megawatts from PG&E, is because, and I should say the central procurement entity, is because the central procurement entity is going out and buying that local RA that they are obligated to buy for the state. And then they allocate our share of that to us so that we can use our share towards our system requirement. And so that's what we're doing here. So most of this is gas, most of this gray bar is gas-fired capacity from the central procurement entity that was used for local RA. And then there's also Diablo Canyon that we are allocated our share of Diablo Canyon as well. That's state law. And you can talk to Nathaniel if you have more questions. Moving up the chart, now we look at our natural gas-fired RA capacity in brown. And you can see that's a big chunk and it is flat profile as discussed on previous slides, right? It's flat profile across the 24 slices. We'll keep moving. In a small red slice of geothermal, flat profile, that will get bigger in the future. Then you see a 16-hour block of hydro and ACS energy. If you remember the asset controlling supply energy we talked about a couple weeks ago, This is almost all imported RA in a 16-hour block that we are using for our requirement. And it also includes a small amount of small hydro, which is renewable qualifying. The next color is purple, and that is demand response, which is, I think, 5 hours there in the evening, a small slice of it. And then a very small slice of biogas that I can't see in dark green. And then in light green, we have our wind. And you can see that it is peaking in the evening, in the nighttime slices. And then in yellow, we have our solar in the middle of the day, obviously, and then storage in pink, precisely when we need it the most, right? And that is not a coincidence. We put it there, obviously, on purpose. Okay, so that is the chart. I'm going to go through just a few observations on this chart, and then I will stop and pause for questions and comments. The first observation is that we met our obligation in every slice, right? So that's good. That's a check. The second observation is that we are long from hour ending 1 through hour ending 15. So midnight to 3 p.m. We are long. And by the way, that length is more than enough length to cover the charging energy, the charging capacity that we are required to bring to the filing in order to make that pink storage eligible. So in order for MCE to show that storage there in the evening, we have to have excess capacity in other slices to make it eligible. And we do. We actually have more than we need in this case, but we meet that charging capacity requirement. So that's a check. The third thing I want to say is that when you look at this chart, you will say, where did all of MCE's solar go? And the answer is we sold it. We sold off the solar that we did not need to meet our compliance obligations. So this chart is a little bit misleading because we have actually quite a bit of solar at MCE, as you know, but we were optimizing our portfolio and we sold it, the portion that we didn't need, we sold it off. Any questions? And let's start in Concord. I didn't do that.
We have a hand raised by Director Slakach.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. My question is, could we meet all our RA requirements with just clean energy? You mentioned that we sold solar energy. If we had kept that, could we meet more of our RA requirements with clean energy as opposed to natural gas?
No, is the short answer. We're not even close right now. Theoretically, yes, but for MCE right now, no. We're heavily reliant. We are heavily reliant on gas-fired capacity right now to meet our obligation.
CB, may I add
Yes.
just something, Director Sakat? So just looking at CB's graph, let's say we have all the solar we could, 100%, right? The only place that they're going to show up is where you have a yellow on this graph. So it will cover maybe a portion of a day, but we need to cover 24 hours a day. So it just, I mean, it's physics. They won't be able to. Sure.
Thank you, Vic, and that's super helpful. Yeah, exactly.
This is Director Darling. So as I remember, again, RA hurts my head. Thank you for trying to make it make sense. That the solar used to be able to provide more RA, but it has been devalued over time because the grid is saturated and constrained and a bunch of other things. So that's one of the things that we're struggling with. Is that true?
Yes, under the old rules, it was devalued a lot. Then we switched to these new rules, which are called slice of day. And with slice of day, it's a different framework. So you'll still see very strong solar values actually in the middle of the day slices in the summer, right? If you remember that, the chart we had, I guess it was the last slide actually, you remember the solar was peaking at roughly 80, 85% of PMAX in the summer months. That's pretty darn good. The problem is you get zero in all the nighttime slices. And so to your point, you're exactly right. It is devalued, but it's devalued by distinguishing between slices. That's the way it's being accounted for now. So you get good value in the middle of the day and obviously nothing in the nighttime. And also in the winter, right, it's also lower.
And then you said that the part of the bars that are over the curve are what you use to show that you can provide the charging capacity.
Exactly.
Exactly. But just using my eyeballs to measure it, it's probably more than we need. Do we actually procure that extra natural gas RA for hours, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Are we buying more than we need, or is that?
This is really good. This is a really good question, and I might not be able to answer it because I didn't do the procurement, and we would need John to help us with this from PEA. But I will say, if you look again in the evening slices, like hour ending 17, hour ending 21, we need all that gas-fired RA. Like whatever amount that is, I don't know what the number is, but it's a huge chunk of gas-fired RA. We need all of it to meet that those evening slice requirements. And therefore, because we need it in the evening, we're going to automatically get it in all those other slices.
So you don't buy it. You don't buy it like, oh, I only want in hours X, Y,
Correct.
and Z.
You can't, unfortunately,
you buy it around the clock. Okay.
You can't buy. You cannot decouple by hour. They force you to buy the whole 24 slice block.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Sorry, Sabrina, just a minute. I just want to add that that we are under the compliance rules of the PUC, but not the market. The sellers are not. So we know what we need and when we need it, but the sellers have continued to use their market power.
Yeah. So we couldn't buy exactly what we want. We have to buy what the seller will sell.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think Sabrina's got her hand, right?
Thanks, Sibi. I think all great questions. And I'll just note, I think CB sort of touched on it here, but we actually have been advocating for it and have a bill out there as well to do hourly load transactability for RA, which would hopefully alleviate some of those issues that CB was just mentioning. But I did want to quickly touch back on this question. I think it's a really good one about whether we could meet all of our RA requirements with clean RA. I think the answer, I think CB correctly answered it, that right now the answer is no. And theoretically, yes, right? But the reason we can't is because the market is constrained. It would be very cost ineffective, even if we were able to find the resources to do so. So it would have a really large increase to MCE's rates is what we would expect. And I think just wanted to maybe do a plug. I think we're going to sort of tee this up a little bit in the IRP conversation at the board next week. Because in addition to managing our RA requirements, we have to also build a portfolio that satisfies IRP requirements, which actually use different counting methodology than RA does. So that adds additional complexity and makes it even more difficult for us to fill our RA portfolio with just clean RA. Though we certainly, over time as MCE endeavor to fill our portfolio with more clean RA, and that'll be a topic of the IRP discussion next week.
I think that's all Concord's questions.
Oh, Sarah Fowl. Director Wilkinson.
Thanks, Ibi. I've never looked at this data, but I hear at least that MCE doesn't necessarily perform particularly well versus other CCAs in terms of their the composition of their RA. And so the question there is really, what are they doing differently from us, if that is true?
That's a great question. I will invite anyone to help me with this one because I actually don't know either of those questions, which are good, like how we compare to other CCAs and what we're doing differently. We do have quite a bit of, we do actually have quite a bit of solar from, but that's nameplate capacity. It doesn't translate into as much across the 24 slices. But you're saying we're just not, as a portion of our total need, our zero emitting RA, you're saying is lower than other CCAs, I think is what you're saying, right?
I have never confirmed it. That's what I've been told, but I'd love to know whether that's confirmed and how.
I would love to see data. I haven't done the analysis.
The other question I had was, we have more geothermal coming online, correct? And so this is going to change quite considerably along with additional storage.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for, for bringing that up, because I forgot to mention that, because I really appreciate that actually, because this picture is a snapshot in time, and we do have honestly hundreds of megawatts coming in the next couple of years of mostly storage, standalone storage, geothermal, and wind. So that it'll help. I mean, we will still need natural gas, but it'll definitely change this picture to some extent, right? Thank you. Oh, Director Wilkinson, you have more?
One quick question there, but with the additional storage, will that be charged by natural gas or will that be charged by solar?
Good question. Hopefully we have enough solar to do it. Would need to double check on that. I think we do, but that's something I need to double check on.
Okay, thank you.
I think Dan and then Bruce, or Bruce and then, okay.
Yeah, so you mentioned that coming up in the next few years, we'll have more geothermal coming online, more wind. And of course, there's some federal policies that are getting in the way of some of the wind, but there's a brighter outlook in the future if we get more wind, because that really helps with this particular problem. So another thing that it would seem like would help is the demand response, which is that's a fairly small sliver there, but my guess is that can come, among other things, from our virtual power plant. So as we scale that up, that gives us the ability to, right in those hours when it's the most important to us, pull some energy out of there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bruce. And if I may, sorry, can I go to Johnny for just 1 second? Because I should have asked Johnny to help me out before.
Yeah, thanks, Ivy. I think to help answer Director Wilkinson's question is the good thing about like the portfolio that is about to get online, particularly more storage, it allows us to also change strategy a little bit on what we go out in the market in the short term to procure. Because looking at this chart, as you see there, the more batteries we have, as you correctly alluded, we'll need to show more charging sufficiency for it. And to the extent that the solar that we have is not sufficient, it doesn't mean that we now have to go and get natural gas for that. We could go out and buy solar sufficiency for that RE to show for that as well, or wind, or it opens up that possibility for optimizing, then greater reduces the need for natural gas. And how that happens is a combination of what we have online at the time, the prices that are being shown, and then the optimization that we do to ultimately get to a picture that, as of right now, this is the snapshot, but then in the future that would look differently. And so that optimization is what we then do based on the portfolio that we have at the time. And so definitely having a lot more storage and hybrid resources coming online helps with that. The other thing that also helps that we haven't talked about it, I think it's just been hinted, is when you have virtual power plants and you have all these other programs that can then change or shape how your requirements and peaking happens, that fleet of storage allows you to shift and move around without necessarily having to go and procure other peaker plants. Because today, That is looking at 18 hours, 18 and 19. When we have an increase in transportation electrification and people are charging later at night, that peak could shift to hours 22, 23, or 21, or it could shift earlier too as well. So that storage definitely gives us that flexibility to shift and adapt in a much more nimble way than we currently have.
Thank you, Johnny. I think Dan's up.
Hey, thank you, CB. I'm going to oversimplify a bit. You've done a great job covering the detail. I really appreciate it. Very well done. But to oversimplify, there's an RA requirement, bunch of calculations. You could not understand those. I'm going to bring it back to board policy. There's also, hey, what's your net qualifying capacity? What did you bring to the table? And you have to buy enough. So that's not going to change. We're going to have to buy RA. We're going to be short. It's getting better with the geothermal and so on, but we're going to be short. So I'm just teeing up for the board. The policy question is kind of what RA are we acquiring at what price, what percentage clean, and so on. To go back to Director Wilkinson's comment, I think she's referring to the 2023 CPUC Resource Adequacy Report, which is the latest report. There may be a new one coming out for 2024 in August. Not sure about that. But in that report, you came out 14th of 25th of 25 CCAs in terms of your clean procurement. So you were kind of ranked, well, 14 and 25th. It didn't look good. So I think the question is, okay, it doesn't have to be answered now, but how do we get here? What are the reasons for that? And how going forward can we get more clean RA? And if it's price prohibitive or not, let's look at that. And is this where we should invest? Because we know this stuff is actually firing every day and being used every day, or should we not because it's too expensive? So I'm just trying to tee up, at the end of the day, we have to buy the RA. So the question for the board is, what are you buying? And I think it helps to have a little retrospective of, okay, well, why are we kind of ranked low now? Because that could potentially inform what's going forward. So thank you for that. And since we may not have another cut at this, I just want to say it would be great to have another session where we kind of focus on these board policy decisions and kind of tee them up so that they kind of have an idea of, so we could make a decision about clean RA versus not. We can make a decision about Index Plus or not acquiring it. If we're hitting our RPS minimum, we don't even have to acquire it. Okay, hedges, there might be some decisions. So if we could kind of tee those up in a 3 or 4 slide presentation, I think it could be really helpful for the board and also for the community to weigh in on their thoughts on that. So that's a plug for having another session that focuses on policy choices we face, that the board is going to face, where the community can weigh in. Thank you very much. This has been an excellent presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate that. Really appreciate all of that. And
Sorry,
really well
CB.
said. Yeah. Oh, Vicken, please. Yeah.
Didn't mean to interrupt you.
Please.
Dan, really appreciate the comment. These are definitely not one-time workshops. There are a lot of interdependent and interconnected points that we are talking about here. We will review all the questions, all the comments, because we need to go through another set of workshops on how moving one string will impact moving other items. They're all interdependent. Location of PPAs, cost of PPAs, congestion management of PPAs that we're relying on so much of it, but we haven't discussed or shared the cost of it, long-term and short-term for the total portfolio. We have 2 tools in this very complicated market. We have Index Plus and hedges. Really looking hard to bring you data for the data to do the talking and to help us in the recommendations that we want to work with the public, folks like you, to take it to the board for consideration. And the next points are, budgetary impacts and rate pressures. And finally, our vision and mission, right? And the intent is I would like to bring all these things to fruition by the end of the year, hopefully for the board to consider with public input what kind of delegation of authority you may want to provide to MCE, what kind of financial and decision-making guardrails we may need to have, what is the definition of a target. It will be extremely financially and procurement-wise helpful if we knew, for example, that a target has some squishiness to it, if that's a technical term. We know what the state's minimum requirements are. We know what our ultimate goals are. But do we have some flexibility to get there instead of killing ourselves or causing too much damage to our finances or having rate pressure? So anyway, I just want to take a couple minutes and say that these are all interdependent and interconnected items for us to bring ultimately through public process for board policy decisions within hopefully some flexibility for us to operate within that at least meets minimum requirements. So anyway, thank you again for participation, especially Dan, you've been very participatory, vocal in your comments, and I love the way that you kind of simplify things. You say, okay, this is where we need to go. I agree, especially the last statement you made. So, but thanks for participation and all the questions.
Thank you, Vicken.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, CB.
CB,
Great job.
we have a few members online that would like to ask questions. I know we're at time.
Sure.
We have Giant, Vicky Johnson, and Eric BM.
BB, thank you. This is a great slide. I really appreciate it. And after the comments from Vicken and other directors, talking at the high level, rate pressure, I participated just to understand this, but I got a lot more than what I was expecting. But one request I would have is, these different bars that you have, I feel like timing is very important. I don't know when do you get to know that what is your PG&E allocation and what is your planning reserve margin. You probably know. I feel like pricing when you procure this, I hope all of that is part of the policy that, give the flexibility, but at the same time, be able to manage the strategy to procure will really help the ratepayers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yep, absolutely.
Vicky, go ahead.
Thank you. The 2023 CPUC report about RA, I believe it was supplied by Nick Patterson, one of his letters. It stated, I believe, that MCE was about 9% renewable purchases for its RA. So just pulling out from this last slide to the earlier small discussion of the pickle, how is it that MCE can present itself as 100% renewables or very high renewables in the pickle and in its marketing? And yet for RA, we see a very large component historically, and here you have August 2026 in natural gas. So I think representing what you offer to the public, to the ratepayers, it needs to be very important. And if things are being obscured or covered up by the rules for the pickle, that's unfortunate. So how can the RA have such a high natural gas component on the slide you're showing now, and on the pickle and in the marketing, MCE's products appear to be, or made to be appear, so clean, so green, so renewable? Thank you.
Thank you so much. The one thing I just want to clarify is that, which I think Sabrina was talking about earlier, is that the power content label is dealing with energy, not power capacity. So that's one distinction I want to make. Sabrina, do you want to?
Happy to help. Yeah, yeah, great question. I think to CB's point, and as I mentioned earlier, California really has decided to kind of do reliability showings and energy accounting separately. And that energy accounting that you see on the joint rate mailer, on the power content label, that is energy only. So our RA only natural gas contracts, which may represent, I think, um, vast majority of our natural gas, because we don't have the legal title to the energy, we only contract for capacity, it doesn't show up on the PCL. And importantly, I don't have the regulation right in front of me, but we do have to market based on our PCL. And so our power portfolios on the PCL, that is how MCE has to market. So we can't or we could think about, but generally we can't market differently than what's on the PCL, and so that's why we represent our portfolios that way. So yeah, and happy to answer any other questions on that because I do recognize that it's very confusing. But essentially, PCL is energy, and capacity contracts are not energy, so they don't show up there, and that is a power source disclosure program run by the CEC requirement.
And we have Eric, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. This is Eric Viam from the CCA Workforce Environmental Justice Alliance. I just want to start by thanking again for just an excellent deep dive into resource adequacy. And I recommend this as a primer for all current and future board members. The comment that I wanted to add into the conversation is the other tools and the future outlook for new resources that we have to meet resource adequacy. One I would just want to mention is and this is for consideration of board members when considering policy priorities. And one is the load curve itself, reforming the load curve by investing in energy efficiency and other measures that help to reshape that load. That's something we haven't talked about. There are many opportunities there. And then the other is, as regulations change, to recognize the resources we have behind the meter through battery storage, and in the future, bidirectional vehicles. There's those sorts of investments that provide community benefit and resilience can also be resources that help address our resource adequacy as we move through the mid-transition. So again, thank you for the conversation today. This is extremely helpful.
Thank you,
Hey, Eric, this is Vicken. Sorry, I'm interrupting, CV. Thank you for that comment. Keep an eye on upcoming board agendas. We will do a deep dive on our energy efficiency programs, and we're going to bring all the investment that MCE is doing in the grant-funded projects that we have as well. So more to come if you're interested. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you all.